Okay, so next thing that we are going to talk about is list nesting, as same as we talked about the branch statement nesting. Remember, we talked about the if else structure can be nested. Okay, similarly, if functions can be nested, the list can also be nested. So we can have list containing within a list. So for example, here my list. So the first element or the zeroth element in this list is itself a list. Okay. So previously what we were having, the zeroth element was like a single integer value or a string value. Okay. So here the zeroth element contains a list itself. Okay. And this is what we call nesting a list within a list. First element is also a list. We can also have a single element, also have a string or anything like that. So first nested list, my list 0, if I were to execute this, my list underscore 0, what do you think it will print? 1020 as a list. Yeah, because it's a list. This is the zeroth element of my underscore list. Okay, so it will print the zeroth element, whatever it is. If it is a single integer, if it is a floating point value, a string value, or if it's a list containing 100 elements. Okay, so it will print the entire list containing 100 elements. The second element in the list is 1. And for example, if I have to access a particular element within the nested list, I have to first specify 0. The 0 will access, the first 0 here will access the 0th element in the list. And since we know as a programmer that the 0th element itself is a list, so we can specifically access the 0th or the first element by specifying the next index 0. Okay, so here it would access, it would return what? The last line would return what value? 10. 10, exactly. So the first one is printing 1020, the second one 3040, and the element 0 of first nested list is 10. Okay, so if I were to ask you like to print the second element or the element which is placed at the index number 2, what do you think, if instead of having 0 here, if I would write 2, what would happen? It will throw off an error because there is no element placed at that index. Okay. So list indexing, again, it's a very important thing to understand because you will be very frequently using this nested list and how to access the element, certain particular element in nested list. So two-dimensional list acts like a table. So if you have, again, this is the nested list. So first of all, this is the list. We can arrange elements in separate rows. Okay, it will just, the Python while compiling, while reading the code, it will just discard the enters or the white spaces. So this is one way of arranging the elements. Instead of having things arranged like this, this representation is more readable. So if you have like 10 rows or 3 rows, you can arrange them all in a separate line. Okay, remember that each element is separated by a comma. Okay, so list nest, right? So if we have to, so for example, it will create a table like this. So we have 2 rows and 3 columns. 2 rows because we have 2 nested lists, and both of the lists contains 3 columns: 10, 0, 55, 0, 4, 16. So when we execute this one, list underscore nest 0, 0 equal 34, what do you think is going to happen? So this is our data. Which value is going to be changed? If you have a studied matrix, by looking at it, you can simply identify the element placed at 0, 0 index, 0th row, 0 column, 0th row, 0 column, yeah? 10 will be replaced with 34, okay? Similarly, 1, 1, so first row, first column, 4 would now be updated with 72, and similarly, the third one is first row, second column, which means 16 will be updated with the value 98. Okay. So again, these are just some conceptual things which again you might be dealing with during your programming, as well as some conceptual questions that you can expect in exam. Okay. So the levels of nested list is arbitrary, which means that we can nest as many lists as we want. Okay, there is no limitation for that one. Accessing the nested list items, all items in nested list can be accessed using nested for loops. We will be talking about for loops probably today, or if we cannot reach that far, in the next class, hopefully. Okay, so for example, we have a list here. So just to let you know that we haven't covered this for loops, we will be covering this concept, but briefly I can tell you that we can access all the elements for example, if you have to repeatedly access different number of elements, so instead of accessing the elements like this by hard coding their index values, we can loop through the data. Means we can start off from reading from the 0th value, 0, 1, 2, 3, and let's say we have to read a second row. So for example, first row, second column, if I have to read. So I can nest for loops 2 times and I can get access to that value. Again, it will be more clear when we reach to for loops. Okay. So what we are doing here in this case is for row in currency. So currency is the list name, and we are accessing the row first, and then once we access the row, what we are doing is now we are accessing the column. So for the 0th row, the 0th column would be this one, 2, 6, and 11. So what we are doing is we are just printing the value of column, and again the print has a default behavior changing line. We can override that behavior by using this passing this argument and equals, or updating this argument and equal \t. Remember we talked about the default parameters in functions, right? Do you recall the default parameters in function? What are default parameters? When we have the value of the parameter defined, but we do not pass that value. So default parameter is like, just to recall, so suppose we had a definition of, let's say, test. We had x, y, and let's say and equals \n. Okay. So and it has some functionality in there. So when I call this function test, I have to specify the value of x and y and the third argument n, which is a default parameter, which is an optional parameter. So I can choose to specify 1, 2, and I can specify the value of and, let's say, space. Okay, but if I do not specify this, what happens? Will it throw off an error? It will not throw off an error because it will use the default value that has already been defined. The same is the case with the print function. So print function has a default value of and this \n, which is like change of characters, change of line. So whenever the print statement is executed, the line is changed automatically, and we have discussed this before. And in order to override this behavior, what we do is we specify and equals like space, or you can write a string of your choice. You can also write t, which will give a tab, okay, 1 tab key space. Okay, so this is what it is happening here. And equals, we are overwriting the default behavior of the print function. So \t would print the value, and then it gives a tab space before printing the next value. Okay, so here we have only one print statement. You can see here we have only one print statement, and it is printing everything. Okay, and this is the beauty of like looping. Instead of writing print statement like 9 times, we have only one statement, and it is printing or accessing all the elements of the data. Okay. Again, we will be talking about for loops in much details. What is the syntax and how we can initialize for loops. Okay.